top 5 signs you might be autistic. Not all signs of autism are easily visible from the outside. In this video, we'll take a detailed look at the top 5 signs that you might be autistic, mistakes people often make, key things to look out for, and a few bonuses I'll throw in along the way. The last one especially surprises most people, so make sure you stick around until the end, and I'll finish with 3 practical steps you can take from here. Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So if you hang around the autistic community long enough, you'll start noticing some initially very subtle patterns that start to become more and more obvious once you know what you're looking for. One of the first outward signs to notice is autistic eye contact. It's a myth that autistic people can't make eye contact, but it's also true that making atypical eye contact is a fairly universal trait. So sometimes you can pick this up pretty quickly, but it's not always easy to notice from the outside, especially if you're not 100% sure what you're looking for. You're not looking for someone who doesn't make eye contact. Instead, it's a special type of atypical eye contact. It might be too much or not enough or just a little bit different in a way that you can't quite put your finger on. So if you're asking yourself if this applies to you, there are a few questions you can ask yourself. Do you have an aversion to eye contact? Do you have strategies that you use to make it look like you're giving appropriate eye contact? And/or do you not think that eye contact is all that important to begin with? In the first instance, in my experience, most neurotypicals actually like eye contact. When done right, it's enjoyable. It's a way to connect. I remember a friend of mine saying she caught up with an old friend in a cafe, and one of the most notable things about the catch-up is that it was just a really good dose of eye contact. It's almost like cuddling or physical affection. For lots of people, it's kind of nice, and if you don't get very much of it, you tend to notice. I know I personally would much prefer to sit next to someone and have a chat with them while we're both looking into the distance rather than sitting across from each other. That just feels too intense for me. Many people describe it as if someone is literally looking into your soul and there's an intense pressure to perform and give the appropriate reaction, except I don't know what the appropriate reaction is supposed to be. So instead, and this comes to question 2, I have strategies to give just enough eye contact so that it's socially appropriate while avoiding the bits that are the most uncomfortable for me. Some people describe strategies like looking at the bridge of someone's nose instead, or deliberately switching from eye to eye or different places around the face. Lots of autistic people describe how it's a lot more difficult to pay attention when you're focusing on providing adequate eye contact. And this kind of makes sense because if your focus and attention is mostly thinking, make sure to look them in the eye, make sure to provide a couple of seconds and then look away and then, okay, 1, 2, 3, change position where I'm looking at the face. That all requires lots of extra brain power that is diverted away from the listening process. I talk about this explicitly in my book, Unlocking Your Emotional Brain. High-masking autistics might be able to replicate eye contact very well on the outside, but if you're using those kinds of strategies, that's a very conscious process, and that is not at all how the naturals do it. For a neurotypical person who generally enjoys eye contact, then all they're doing is getting an appropriate amount of eye contact that they feel like is good for them, and it happens to be good for the other person too. And thirdly, if it never once crossed your mind that eye contact was actually incredibly important, and you're wondering why people make such a big deal of it, that is a very strong sign of being out of touch socially. In other words, your experience of the social world is very different to most other people's experience of the social world. Something that is incredibly important to most people is not important to you. It's almost like saying, I didn't realize I was supposed to smile when saying hello to someone. Or I didn't realize that my facial expression was communicating something to another person. Or a more extreme example that I read in Tim Chan's memoir, for a long time he didn't realize that spoken words contained meaning, and only much later did he figure it out and unlock language. So in a similar way, if you're not naturally aware of the immense importance of these kind of nonverbal cues like eye contact and facial expressions and things like that, that's a pretty strong sign of a big difference in your social world. The second of the 5 top signs that you might be autistic is disliking small talk. Lots of us in the autistic community describe small talk as torture. Most of us who are high masking can do it at least a little bit, but most don't enjoy it and it kind of feels like a bit of a barrier. It's something I have to do, not something that I want to do. Like I'm just buying my groceries at the supermarket and the cashier says something like, "How's your day been so far?" And I have a big sigh, like, oh, do I really have to do this? Yes, I suppose I probably have to engage in this everyday communication. On the flip side, I have lots of neurotypical friends who kind of enjoy it to some degree. It's a little bit like getting your hair cut and having a casual chat with the barber. It's what people do because it's easier than sitting in silence. For many people, it's just a nice, simple, light, pleasant form of social interaction. It's safe, it's easy, you can turn your brain off. Nothing deep or complex or vulnerable here. Just nice, light social interaction. Whereas the autistic experience tends to be a desire for deeper connection. I know when I'm trying to connect with someone, I'm looking for something that we can actually bond over, something we're both interested in. I want that level of vulnerability, that level of authenticity that doesn't come from this kind of superficial interactions. And when I do find someone I can really connect with, the bond and the interaction there can be quite intense. I felt so alone most of the time that finally connecting with someone feels amazing. And I think this might be one of the reasons that small talk is almost universally despised in the autistic community. In small talk, there's a pressure to mask. There's a pressure to do something that's socially appropriate, but doesn't necessarily express anything about who I am. And so when I'm wearing that mask, it might look like I'm connecting on the outside, but the inner experience is I feel like I'm not being seen. I feel extremely isolated and alone because the other person is not actually seeing any authentic part of me, which means instead of being a nice, enjoyable, easy connecting experience, it's a profoundly isolating, boring, disconnecting experience. And this leads on to point number 3. The third top sign you might be autistic is masking. A tendency to do what you think you're supposed to do rather than being led primarily by what I actually want to do in a situation. This looks like learning the social rules in a bit of a black and white way, scanning the situation, what am I supposed to do here, what's being expected of me in this situation, and behaving in a way that prioritizes following the group norm at the expense of listening to what I actually feel like. Now, in a sense, everyone does this to some degree. We all have a socially constructed self, and so people often ask me, what's the difference between masking versus just having a socially appropriate, socially constructed self in any given situation? And the main difference is the priority. Masking is doing what other people expect me to do and suppressing any of my own desires, whereas a healthy, socially constructed self says, well, this is who I am, this is what I want to bring to the situation. How can I modify that slightly so that it can be socially appropriate? I remember an example in one of my autistic online meetings. There was one young man sharing that this is the first time he's been in an all autistic space. And it was actually quite weird and confronting because he was looking around the virtual room trying to pick up clues from other people as to how to behave, but there just weren't any. And it was confronting because the question is, well, if I don't have to be something for other people, well, who am I? I just haven't had any practice at being me without being defined by the situation I'm in. And unfortunately, the more masking you do, the more unconscious it becomes, and it becomes so normal that it's hard to realize you're not actually being yourself as much as you are performing and doing what you think you should be doing in a situation. And after decades of internalizing the norms of what everyone knows is the best thing to do, everyone knows you work 9 to 5. Everyone knows you have 3 meals a day. Everyone knows you sleep at nighttime. They might be really good solutions for lots of other people, but for a lot of autistic people, especially late identified adults, trying to fit someone else's mold eventually leads to burnout, and sometimes we just hit a wall, can't do it anymore, and everything comes crashing down. Unfortunately, having a major life crisis after some initial success is one of the main ways that people realize they have autism later in life. In my life coaching work, this is by far the biggest issue that people come to me with. I've just realized I'm autistic. I've just realized my life that I've set up does not work for me. I've been doing what I think I should be doing. I'm approaching burnout, and I really need to find a better way. And the path out of that is to slowly get in touch with what I actually want and need so that I can mask less in daily life and set up my environment so that I can be an authentic version of myself and be successful in the world at the same time. The fourth top sign that you might be autistic is that you've always been a bit different. This is kind of the flip side of masking, and weirdly, paradoxically, they often go together. A core autistic experience/criteria is having difficulty relating to your peers. And one of the things that happens when it's hard to relate to your peers is you end up forming relationships with people who are quite different from you. Do you tend to be the odd one out in terms of gender or age or interests? Are you always the first or the last, but less often somewhere in the middle? For me, for example, for reasons that I do not consciously choose, I often look around the room and realize I'm the only male identifying person in the group. Or maybe I'm the youngest by a couple of decades. Or maybe I'm the only one at a metal concert with no tattoos. I remember of all my friends, I was the last one to get a smartphone. I was the last one to stop using a street directory. I was also the first one to get married and the only one to quit my job and go traveling without a plan for 2 years. It's not always easy to put your finger on it, but if I look back over my life, I've always been a bit different no matter where I end up. So, are you the black sheep of your family? Or maybe the rainbow sheep of your family? Or maybe your whole family is the rainbow family? This happens a lot as well. If our whole family is quite different, and we know for a fact that autism runs in families, or all of my friends are all equally weird, since we also know it's very common for birds of a feather to flock together, it might not be immediately obvious that you're the odd one out. But if you look at the wider society, if you tend to be doing fringe things and kind of get a sense that it's just a little bit difficult to do those mainstream expected things that everyone else is doing, it might be a strong sign that you're a bit different in more ways than one. And as a bonus, this one could maybe be a category of its own, but I'll include it in this one anyway. If you have a very different sensory profile, that's also a very strong sign that you might be autistic. Do you just have this overall feeling that the world is too bright and too noisy and too smelly? This is another way to be out of sync with everyone around you. So for me personally, I much prefer quiet spaces, and even as a teenager, I would much prefer to go to bed early while all my friends were partying into the night, but then I'd be up at 7 a.m. full of energy. I remember I went on a university orientation camp. Think like 100 18-year-old first-year university students running amok for 3 days at a campsite. Music was playing late into the night, but of course I went to bed. And then a handful of us invented metal in the morning, taking our revenge, blasting Slayer and Slipknot through the massive speakers at 7 a.m. Let's just say I was a little bit out of sync with most other people. And yes, if you haven't noticed already, I like to understate things. That's an understatement. So we're almost done, just one more to go, and then I'll share my 3 practical suggestions of what you can do from here at the end. Number 5, the 5th top sign that you might be autistic, and this one surprises a lot of people. You might be autistic if you have too much empathy. It's an absolute myth that autistic people lack empathy. In 2022, Chris Bonello from Autistic Not Weird ran a massive online survey collecting over 11,000 responses, 7,000 of which were from actually autistic people. And notably, over 70% of those autistic respondents reported experiencing intense empathy. In other words, yes, there is some kind of issue there around empathy, but very often it's not a lack of empathy, it's actually intense empathy. And weirdly, experiencing intense empathy often comes across on the outside as looking like you don't have empathy. It's a bit counterintuitive at first, but it does make sense. If I often experience intense empathy, especially if I experience it as overwhelming, then I'm likely to not engage as much for fear of getting overwhelmed. And so from the outside, it looks like I'm avoiding emotional things when actually the reason I'm avoiding them is because I feel them too intensely. Now, the opposite is also true. Many autistic people experience alexithymia, finding it very difficult to get in touch with their own feelings. Just double check for yourself. If you can't name your own feelings, is it because you're not feeling very much? Or is it because you're feeling too much and everything's just a jumbled mess that you can't tease apart? Either way, whether it's experiencing intense empathy or a lack of empathy, it can feel like there's this kind of emotional layer of information that everyone else is tuned into that I'm missing out on. It's a little bit like being hard of hearing or struggling with a foreign language. Everyone around me seems to be communicating and understanding each other just fine, but it's a lot of extra effort to tap into that information. And sometimes it's easier to just check out. I remember once on my travels through Europe, I visited the UK, and it was the first time in months that I was in an English-speaking country. And catching the train was so annoying because I could actually understand the conversations of the people around me. In a sense, because I have such good auditory processing, it was a bit overwhelming and I would have preferred to be somewhere else where I couldn't understand them. So let's blow that myth out of the water once and for all. Autistic people tend to have a lot of empathy, even if it doesn't look like that from the outside a lot of the time. So finally, wrapping all this up, let's finish with 3 things you can do. If you're resonating with this video and you're thinking, well, yeah, maybe I am autistic, maybe this does explain a few things in my life. My top tip for answering that question and figuring out if you are autistic, and also for learning about autism in general, is that if you want to learn about autism, the best way is to go out and meet autistic people. It's a little bit like wanting to really get a good sense of a culture. If I want to understand Chinese culture, I need to see real examples with real stories from real people. And if I want a really deep understanding, I need to go and visit and actually experience it for myself. There's a big difference between reading about something and actually experiencing it in real time. So 3 practical things you can do from here. Number 1 is to seek out personal stories. These days, there are lots of books and memoirs written by actually autistic people. On my blog, you can find dozens of diagnosis stories submitted by the community. Number 2 is to increase your understanding of autism by seeking out autistic-created resources. Again, there's more and more of this available these days. See if you can find autistic-led organizations near you. I know there are quite a few in Australia already. On my website, for example, we've got an Autism 101 course, as well as a library of webinars and other resources teaching you about autism using first-hand lived experience to put it into perspective. And finally, number 3 is to join a community. See if you can find a local autistic social group or support group. Otherwise, there are also online spaces available. Meet others, share your story, have personal interactions in real time. This kind of experience is absolutely irreplaceable. Packed full of what I call mirror moments, when you see yourself in someone else and you say, yes, exactly, me too. Or the opposite, when you share part of your story that you thought was completely unique to you and realize there are actually others who understand your experience as well. Okay, so I don't know how long this video is, but I think I should definitely leave it there for today. If you've watched a few of my videos already and you're looking for more information, check out autismfromtheinside.com.au to see how you can get more involved. Join the community, access our live events, and hopefully find the support you need on the next step of your journey. As usual, I'd love to hear what you think, so please leave a comment if you can. Otherwise, thanks again for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you again next week. Bye.